So, tomorrow I'm gonna begin the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and before that I'm gonna be looking at this cool little mini-series by Extra History, who we haven't been with for a bit, um, called Ibn Battuta? Haktua? I don't know, but yeah, overall, it's only 46 minutes. I think I can watch it all in one go. And yeah, overall, I'm just gonna watch this, then jump into the Ottoman Empire. Starting tomorrow, for real. It's no more any side videos request. Um, so yeah, let's get to it, shall we?
June 23rd, 1325, Tangier. A 21-year-old scholar, mounted on a donkey, leaves home for the first time. His objective, the holy city of Mecca. He expects to be gone for 2 years, possibly even 3. I set out alone, he wrote later, having neither fellow traveler in whose companionship I might find cheer, nor caravan whose part I might join, but swayed by an overmastering impulse within me, and a desire long cherished in my bosom to visit these illustrious sanctuaries. So I braced my resolution to quit my dear ones, female and male, and forsook my home as birds forsake their nests. And he will not return home for another 24 years.
Holy crap.
Which is a... When Ibn Battuta left Tangier, he had no idea that he was commencing on a journey so epic, we'd still be talking about it 700 years later. And in his quarter century of wandering, he would end up seeing nearly the entire Muslim world of the 14th century, from the deserts of the Empire of Mali to the Islamic outposts of Indonesia and southern China. In doing so, he would travel around 75,000 miles, enough to circle the globe 3 times, meet 60 heads of state, and visit 40 modern countries. He would survive kidnapping and shipwreck, witness revolts and military campaigns, be imprisoned by a mad sultan, and encounter the horrors of the Black Plague. And when he finally returned, the ruler of Morocco asked him to spend 2 years dictating all he saw to a literary scholar. The resulting book, a gift to those who contemplate the wonders of cities and the marvels of traveling, a title often shortened to The Travels.
Yeah, thank God. But that's such a cool thing. So he's basically an explorer. And that's pretty cool. That's a new perspective. We usually just follow military folk and generals. So this is a pretty cool new series, at least in terms of we're following, like I said, a traveler who just saw so much. Yeah, like I said, but I actually have begun some of my travels. Like, for the most part, I live here in America. I've been stationed here my entire life, born and raised here, but I have left a few times. I went to Nicaragua, where my mother's family hails from, about 10 years ago. About a year ago, I went to Mexico, but that's still in the same continent, but other parts, Central America. That's the furthest I had gone until I went to Greece, in May. So, last May, by the time this video comes out, a month or 2 ago, I went to Greece. And that was really fun. I always wanted to see it because I'm obsessed with Greek culture and history. And I just had a wanderlust. I just really wanted to go there, and I wanted to see many of the historically rich sites, such as the Acropolis. I went to Athens, the islands of Samos, Naxos. Yeah, overall just a wonderful time, and I really loved it, Though I'll say the only part I didn't like was flying, because I'm not much of a flyer, guys. I don't like being on a plane, and it took 10 hours to get to France, because before I went to Greece, I went to France. We did a kind of a hop, so I was in France for a day at Paris, and then jumped all the way to Greece. So I have begun my travels. I saw Europe, Western Europe with France, and then the Balkans with Greece. So, Yeah, like I said, it was really great. Just the only part I didn't like was the flight, because I said I don't like flying, and I got on like 8 different plane rides on that trip. So as you imagine, that was probably the hardest part for me. And the thing is about flying is that I think statistically it is actually the safest form of travel, actually. At least so it says, but I still don't like it because just being, if something goes wrong, you're even more powerless, I think, than if something were to go wrong if you were driving a car or something, because you just fall. Like, I'm not gonna take control of a plane if something bad happens, obviously. So, I don't know, I guess it's just, there's no illusion of power, I think, when you're flying. But again, the flight home was I mean, getting there was, for 10 hours was pretty rough, but the flight home from Greece, because we went hopped from Samos, flew to Athens, flew to Paris, then flew all the way back to here, California, LA. I think I was in a plane. Granted, there were some brief stops to the airport on each stop, but like for the most part, I was flying for like 14 plus hours, and I was losing my mind by the end of it. And I'm getting that because like back then, and that's quick though. Like I think people in the past would have been like, oh, 10 hours? Holy crap, that's amazing. Like, we had to travel months to get from here to there, and years, you know? It puts into perspective, and that's kind of what I kept telling myself a lot. Like, man, people in the past would have killed for this. You know, they had to walk months, to get to a certain far destination to see some of the world. Like, we only have a few hours, like, you know, less than a day, so again, you know, that kind of was something I kept telling myself. And it does put into perspective, you know. I don't know, I'm kind of, I just really wanted to talk about my travels for a bit there.
1,000 pages long, which is sort of a problem if, for example, you're adapting it into a series of 5 short animated videos. But in truth, even if we had 10 times the budget and development time for this series, we still wouldn't be able to do all of Ibn Battuta's travels justice. But what we can do, though, is look at the travels the way historians do today, as a way of understanding the breadth of Islamic religion and culture during the 14th century, how faith was adapted to local conditions, and the trade and travel links that could take a man from North Africa to China. And of course, we'll look at the curious, intrepid, ambitious, and often quite prickly man who experienced it all. Apart from what we learned from the travels, we actually know surprisingly little about Ibn Battuta himself. But we can be sure his formative years in Morocco were the perfect training for a great traveler. Tangier was not one of North Africa's great cities, but it was a massive trade hub. To the north lay Europe. To the south, the golden kingdoms of sub-Saharan Africa. To the east lay the Mediterranean trade networks, and to the west, the burgeoning Atlantic trade. And its docks thronged with both Muslims and Christians, along with merchants from Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Ibn Battuta's family were scholars of Islamic law and gave their son an education that would let him follow in the family tradition. This education made him a qadi, a magistrate or judge of Islamic law. Not only an honorable profession, but one, it turned out, that would let him find work wherever there was a Muslim community. His education also likely instilled the curiosity that would drive him on his great journey. For in Islam, curiosity and the seeking of knowledge is considered a religious duty. In fact, a common saying at the time, seek knowledge even unto China, would really end up becoming quite literal for this young man. But Ibn Battuta's travel experience began by embarking on the Hajj, or annual pilgrimage to Mecca. A religious duty for all Muslim men, if they had the resources, were healthy enough to do it, and their leaving wouldn't place a burden on their family. He set out alone at first, traveling east across North Africa, but soon joined up with a pilgrim caravan for protection against bandits. And they were happy to have him, as having a qadi among a caravan meant that disputes and matters of religious law could be solved without stopping the train. So they crossed the land of the slave sultans, the Mamluks, who had risen from being enslaved soldiers to taking over the state. And though he was not far from home, Ibn Battuta began to reveal what he would be like as a traveler. A fever hit him hard, the first of many on his journey. Soon, he was so ill he could barely stay on his mount. "If God decrees my death," he said, "then my death shall be on the road, with my face set toward Mecca." Determined not to stop, he tied himself to his saddle in order to keep going. But stop he did, and during that brief sojourn, he did a very Ibn Battuta thing. While recovering, he fell in love and formed a marriage contract. but then dissolved it before the ceremony after a dispute with the woman's father. But then shortly afterward, he would meet and marry another woman, the first of 10.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
yeah, that's right. He would marry 10 women on his journey. Now, we don't know much about these marriages. He simply mentions them in passing, confirming the Islamic
Wow, that's wild. Dude's a playboy. Heck yeah.
literary convention of keeping his private life private. And often, like with his first wife, he would divorce his wives when he moved on. A common practice in medieval Islam, and perhaps these divorces may even have been mutually agreed, since religious law made that the easiest route to ending a marriage. But here is where
That's wild. Heck yeah. Dude really just stopped it. Oh, that's cool.
we get the first hint of Ibn Battuta's lifelong fascination with women. Wherever he went, along with descriptions of food, agriculture, religious life, and court processions, he often remarked on how attractive he found the local ladies. He was also known to have innumerable lovers and concubines over his life, including several that were enslaved. And it's also at this point we get an early indicator of his, well, let's just call it snippy nature. On a stop in Egypt, he visited the town bathhouse and was shocked to find the men inside were not wearing the hip coverings required by law. Basically, they were naked in the locker room. But now here's the thing about Ibn Battuta. He could get a bit judgy. And if he saw you doing something he considered wrong, oh, he was definitely telling the teacher. In fact, historians often refer to him as a busybody, for being all up in your business. But to put it in a more modern vernacular, Ibn Battuta was a total narc. So instead of just telling those guys to please cover up, he went straight to the local governor and started an official crackdown on proper dress in the bathhouses.
He's like a male Karen, at least in that sense. I'm gonna tell the governor on you. Or like those kids who would like the teacher's pets. So, oh man, that's hilarious. But yeah, I can't blame the dude, traveling the world and seeing some baddies, like, can't blame it, man. That's totally understandable. I saw some baddies on my travels, like, I can't lie, nothing wrong with admiring beauty, man. Though I didn't get married and divorced, but,
Yeah, the phrase, that escalated quickly, was kind of his brand. But while he often comes off as judgmental, his job was to be a judge. And this trip across North Africa offered him the opportunity to develop those skills. Because while he was fully qualified as a Qadi, the universities of Tangier were provincial when compared to those in Cairo, Damascus, and Alexandria. So as he made his way toward Mecca, he would stop to study for a few months under great teachers, gaining further certifications. He saw the great lighthouse of Alexandria, visited Cairo, which he called the Mother of Cities, passed by the Giza pyramids, and traveled along the Nile, but then was halted by a violent revolt. So he doubled back to Cairo, and instead took the royal road to Damascus. Diverting for a moment to visit the tomb of Abraham, then the Muslim sites in Jerusalem, he finally made it to the Mamluk's second capital. But eager to move on, he only spent 24 days in Damascus, probably living in the dormitory of the Great Mosque. Though he did pack that 3 weeks full, managing to survive another illness, gaining further certifications, and celebrating Ramadan. Oh, and of course, he got married and divorced again.
cool.
You don't have to.
That's right, Zoe, because Ibn Battuta. And there he finally joined the official route of the Hajj, across a perilous desert route, haunted by epidemic disease, burning days, and freezing nights. And this time, Mamluk soldiers guarded them from bandits. Yet the caravan made it to its destination without incident, the city of Medina, where the Prophet Muhammad had retreated with his followers when driven out of Mecca. While there, he prayed at the Mosque of the Prophet, built over Muhammad's tomb, before continuing on. Then finally, upon reaching the holy city of Mecca, he took part in the rituals of the Hajj, making several circles around the Kaaba, bowing to God near the shrine of Abraham's footprints, standing on the plains before the Mount of Mercy, where the Prophet gave his farewell sermon, reciting prayers, and listening to religious teachings for a full day. And of course, he studied, seeking always more knowledge. For this pilgrimage had merely whetted his appetite for seeing the world. Not to mention he had come across news that the Sultan of Delhi, immensely rich and generous, was in need of officials with proper certifications, which is why he was building his resume. Fame, fortune, and adventure awaited in the East, and he decided to extend this 18-month trip a little bit longer. So Ibn Battuta turned his mount towards the lands of Muslim Persia and the devastated city of Baghdad.
There are some aspects that I kind of find myself relating to. Like I said, for the most part, most of my life, I'm pretty hermited. you know, very much I keep to myself. I usually just stay in my house, in my room. But like I said, as of the last few years, I think that there is sort of like this desire to see the world, because in a way this channel is kind of an extension of that desire. Obviously, you know, um nothing could ever beat going to the real place, but like I keep learning about different places. And if you notice, I rarely cover American history on this channel because I'd much rather learn about the rest of the world than, you know, somewhere where I'm well acquainted with, like America, for instance. And I think there is just a desire in me to just know more about the world as I get older and to see more. Like, I would say now that I'm like 25, like, you know, from last year, the last few years to now, kind of a desire to be like, well, I'll keep trying new things, you know, less insular, less hermited like I've usually been, less antisocial, and just a desire to see the world. That's why, like I said, I went to France, Paris, and I went to Greece, and just there is something so beautiful about seeing historically rich places. Like I said, going to France and seeing so many of the areas in which I've learned about on this channel, where so much happened, you know, from the revolution to the era of Napoleon and even further back, seeing such rich places where great people and great events took place, going to Athens, and just something so humbling about seeing structures such as, you know, the Parthenon, Acropolis, places that stood, you know, thousands of years before I was born and will stand, no doubt, thousands of years once I'm gone from this mortal coil. And there's just something so humbling but exciting about seeing places like that. And I guess, like I said, you know, there's something that, you know, it really is just a great experience, and that wanderlust, I think, is starting to affect me more, you know. And I think, like, in the next few years I'm gonna travel to Peru, mainly because my mom wants to really go to Peru. She went with me, you know, to Europe, and, like, I guess in return I must go with her now to Peru. But again, there's rich history there to learn about as well. I don't know, like I said, and also I guess the desire to learn. Like I said, this channel, I'm not a historian. I've never, you know, marketed myself as a historian. I'm no Mr. Terry or vlogging through history, and a lot of these videos I go into purposely blind. I don't do research before. I kind of like choose to do my learning, a lot of it, first by watching these videos, and then afterwards, you know, looking up more in my own free time. And, you know, but I do have a desire to learn. Like, even before I started this channel, I did a lot of, like, research into battle tactics. Like, I find that so fascinating, learning about, how generals won battles, and, you know, like I said, like, from Alexander to Caesar to the great Hannibal Barca. And, you know, funny thing is, I used to, like, play Dungeons and Dragons and do a DM, and a lot of, like, I used to write, like, history for my worlds, and I would often write about generals who kind of, like, mirrored real-life commanders like Vlad the Impaler or Hannibal Barca. Just, I think my friends didn't get it when I used to play with them and talk about this, unfortunately. But you know, I don't know. Like, I guess where I'm getting at is that, you know, I'm understanding a lot and a desire to learn. And I think that's what this channel really is. Me wanting to learn a lot about different places I haven't been, and it instills a desire in me to go. Like I said, like I've liked the Greek culture for so long, but watching so many of these videos, like, it instilled, like, I had to go and see it, you know? And I did, and France too, and it's just like, there's just, learning is fun, I think, and I'm kind of, you know, blessed in a sense that I've kind of made this my channel, just me sitting here learning about things, and, you know, people, like, enjoy watching, I guess, you know, or at least take the time to keep sticking around and see me on my adventures as I'm kind of jumping around the world and learning about different people. You know, that actually does mean a lot to me, I think. And I would like to keep going with this channel for as long as I can, you know. So yeah, overall, we should get back to this video.
November 1326, Iraq, Il-Khanate. Ibn Battuta sits, waiting for the ritual to begin. At the appointed hour come the Sufi mystics. When the afternoon prayers had been said, drums were beaten, and the brethren began to dance, he wrote. They had prepared loads of firewood, which they kindled into flame, and went into the midst of it dancing. Some of them rolled in the fire, others ate it in their mouths, until they finally extinguished it entirely. Some of them will take a large snake, and bite its head with their teeth, until they bit it clean
Holy
through.
crap.
This is Islam as Ibn Battuta has never seen it, and it will make a lasting impression. When Ibn Battuta was in Egypt,
that's metal. Like I said, you know, like I mentioned before, I'm a Pentecostal. I'm a Pentecostal Christian, and you know, there are some denominations of Pentecostal I've heard that they actually bring snakes to church and let them get bit, I guess, to prove holiness. There's an instance in the Bible where the Apostle Paul was bitten by a viper snake, but the poison didn't affect him because, you know, he was a holy man on a mission for God, and so the poison didn't even, like, affect him. Like, he didn't get poisoned or sick at all. And he just shook the snake off and it fell into a fire. So, I guess, like, there is some biblical parallel to why some Christian denominations do that. We don't, mine in particular, nor any denomination that I've been with, the Catholics or the Trinitarian Christians. And I'm happy for that, because I wouldn't let a snake bite me. But this seems like a unique expression of worship. It just kind of reminded me of that, you know?
Separate holy men prophesied that he would travel far to the east and settle in India. And that made a certain amount of sense. The Sultan of Delhi was actively searching for scholars and judges to fill his bureaucracy, and paying them handsomely. So, when Ibn Battuta got done with his pilgrimage to Mecca, he decided to just keep going. Because not only was he seeing the world, he was making a profit doing it. You see, on his journey, he'd found that rulers often gave pilgrims lavish gifts, and a young Qadi got even more spectacular rewards. He'd heard that the further he got from the Islamic core of the Arabian Peninsula, the more generously a young scholar would be rewarded. Therefore, he made a vow to keep traveling, to see as much of the world as possible, and to never take the same route if he could avoid it. His eventual goal was India, but he might as well have some fun and make some money on his way there. After all, he might spend the rest of his life in India and never get another chance to see this part of the world. So he began his gap year of travel, joining a Persian caravan and crossing out of Mamluk territory, trekking for 44 days into Mesopotamia, into the land of the Khans. A century before, the Mongols had swept into Persia and Iraq, devastating what were, until then, some of the most impressive and advanced cities of the Islamic world. And when Genghis Khan died, his empire split among his 4 descendants, leaving Persia under a Mongol ruler. But in the century since then, the Mongols had converted to Islam and were now patrons of religion and learning. Still, as Ibn Battuta passed through the once mighty city of Baghdad and ruined sites formerly renowned for beauty and scholarship, he reflected on the passing of empires. And he began to realize another thing. He was now truly abroad. His previous travels had taken him to new places, but this was different. As he left the Arabian Peninsula, he ventured into lands that were still religiously Muslim, but had underlying cultures increasingly divergent from his own. Many of the rulers and court figures out here, the people he associated with most, were relatively new converts, 2nd and 3rd generation Muslims, some even 1st. And their practices at times varied from what Ibn Battuta considered the norm. He was about to see Islam in all of its many forms, and that exploration began during his first encounter with Sufi mysticism, a sect that used trance, ritual movement, and chanting as a way to experience God's love on an emotional level, rather than the intellectual manner in which Ibn Battuta was accustomed. The same year, he got to meet the Il Khan himself, joining the royal caravan traveling along the Silk Road to see the capital of Khanate. On the way, he visited with the Great Khan, seeing firsthand how the Mongol invaders had become assimilated into Persian culture. Far from a fierce steppe raider, this Khan was a just ruler, a handsome, observant Muslim who played the lute and composed poems in both Persian and
How
Arabic.
cultured.
His kingdom was mighty and powerful. Ibn Battuta did not know it then, but when he next passed through 11 years later, the mighty Ilkhanate would be no more, its ravaged landscape filled with warfare and death. But that's in the future. Now, he bade the Sultan farewell and reached the Khan's capital, exploring its enclaves of Venetian, Genoese, Arab, and Chinese merchants before touring the Euphrates and then heading back to Baghdad. But it was time to get on to India. His gap year of religious tourism was coming to an end. But first, a side trip back to Mecca to make the Hajj pilgrimage again, because who knew if he'd ever get another chance? Yet that took longer than expected. He'd overextended himself a bit. In 1 year, Ibn Battuta had traveled 4,000 miles, and when he finally arrived back in Mecca, he was so exhausted and ill that after the Hajj, he took a full year to study, pray, and recover. But after that, it was off to
Like
Delhi.
I said, I think nowadays is probably the best era for travelers, simply due to, planes and, our automobiles. Because, man, like, the idea of just having to, like, sail for months or years or walk, ride. Like I said, I think we're living in the era where traveling is the best. And I'm sure people in the past would be like, man, if only we could get to the other side of the world in just like a few hours, like they would, Like, we have it good, and I think that perspective really helps,
He went south to the Red Sea, traveling by ship, until he was blown off course and became too seasick, so he had to continue his travels on land, often walking across the mountains of Yemen. But eventually, he made it to southern Arabia, where Muslim ports controlled the Indian Ocean trade, where he could get on another ship to India and settle down at a real job. But first, a side trip. Because Africa was right there. And look, he might never get back this way again. So he jumped on a ship and went on a port hopping tour of East Africa, visiting the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, as well as the Muslim courts of
Man, this dude's on every side quest ever. Like, he really is. Like, I guess I almost want to say he has ADHD, because it's like he's doing one thing, but it's like, well, I might as well do a lot of other things on the side, I don't have ADHD, so I'm not sure if that's how it works, but from what people I've talked to do, usually say they usually get distracted with other things, so he's on every side quest. But to be fair, this is just like, if I had the chance to just keep seeing things, like I would, I think if I were rich, I would just go back to Europe, probably go back to Greece and stuff, and just see more. Probably stay away from the Middle East for a bit, because there's a lot going on there, but,
Mogadishu, Mombasa, and Zanzibar. There, he saw how Muslim merchants had settled into the ports, converting locals and intermarrying into African families, their languages blending to create what we now know as Swahili. He saw the African section of the vast Indian Ocean trade, with merchants loading vast quantities of gold, ivory, spices, and perfume ingredients into their triangle-rigged ships, along with enslaved Africans captured from kingdoms further inland. And in these port towns, Ibn Battuta first saw societies where Muslims were the minority, where the elites and rulers didn't share a religious tie to the majority of their populations. But these were no frontier ports. They were cities, whose rulers lived in palaces with indoor plumbing. Elites dressed in silk and ate off porcelain, both imports from China. He saw great mosques and mansions carved from coral, mixed cultures formed from Islam's economic dominance of the maritime networks. But again, his time was running short, the monsoon winds changing and blowing back north. So he hopped on a ship back to the Arabian Peninsula, where he could finally travel on to India. But when he arrived on the southern coast of Arabia, he realized it would be cool to see the Gulf of Oman, though that was a bit of a disaster. Their guide tried to rob and murder him, and Ibn Battuta only escaped after fending the man off with a spear. He reached the Gulf dehydrated.
Holy crap, dude. Like you said, what an adventure. Such an adventurous life, eh? But, like, really cool. And yeah, about sea travel, I actually got on a ship when I was at Greece. it was only like an hour, but like I was not used to being. I've never been on a ship in my life, like a big one like that, and it felt weird to me being on there, and I just sat down the entire time and closed my eyes because like my mom next to me got sick, so we stopped after that and decided to stick with just flying to islands. But like I said, I'm not probably not built for sea travel.
Half dead from illness and feet bleeding from the trip. It was a close
Oh.
call, and probably an indication that now it was really time to head to Delhi. Become established. But first, a side trip. Back to Mecca for the Hajj for a third time. After another year of study and rest, Ibn Battuta was finally ready for India. For real this time. He'd buffed his resume with qualifications, could tell stories of far-flung places, and had built up a tidy profit in gifts. But the trip itself would be treacherous, and to get there, he needed a guide. And he couldn't find one. Okay, no problem, because everyone knew that the Turkish Silk Road caravans linked Anatolia with India, and if you joined them, you'd get there eventually. Sure, there were more direct routes, but he'd seen that stuff already. He went to Cairo and met up with a traveling buddy, and reunited, the two stepped onto a Genoese galley and made for Anatolia. And in this land, whose urban centers contained neighborhoods of minority Christians, Jews, and Greeks, and where nomadic herders traveled the wild hillsides, they gave him a warm welcome. This country is one of the finest in the world, he wrote. In it, God has brought together the good things dispersed throughout other lands. Its people are the most comely of men, the cleanest in their dress, the most delicious in their food, and the kindliest folk in creation. Wherever we stopped in this land, whether it a hospice or a private house, our neighbors came to ask after our needs. When we left, they bade us farewell as though they were our relatives. He also saw one city execute people by firing them off a cliff with a catapult, but overall, the people were really nice. Interestingly,
No place is perfect.
he found differences in their religious practice. Though observant Muslims, they chewed intoxicating drugs and did not veil women. In fact, Turkish society surprised him when he found out how high a status women had. Now further weighed down with Turkish gifts, he pushed north toward the Silk Road, down the rapids of swollen rivers, nearly freezing to death in the wilderness, avoiding bandits and thieves. But he made it to the Black Sea and boarded a ship for an even stranger place, one of nomads and horsemen, the land of the Golden Horde. But first, a side trip. May 1332, the Caucasus. Ibn Battuta and his wagon train have pitched their tents on a hill, waiting to see sight of the royal caravan they wish to join. His train full of servants, enslaved people, and concubines has been waiting a long time. Then, dust on the horizon. We saw a vast city on the move, he wrote, with its inhabitants, with mosques and bazaars in it, the smokes of the kitchens rising in the air, for they cook while they march, and horse-drawn wagons transporting the people. He descends to meet Ozbeg Khan, ruler of the Golden Horde. When Ibn Battuta crossed the Black Sea and landed in Crimea, he'd soon realized he'd crossed into another world. Though the Khanate's state religion was Islam, the more European provinces of the empire were thoroughly Christian, filled with Russians and Ukrainians. And that meant red-haired people with blue eyes, who ate pork and made evil noises by ringing their church bells, a sound that terrified Ibn Battuta. But he soon passed out of the infidel lands and entered the steppe, traveling for the first time by wagon rather than horse or camelback, joining a Mongol caravan in order to find the Khan and link up with the Silk Road to India. And he found much to like about the hardy and competent Mongols, but also much that shocked him. Even the observant Muslims drank alcohol, for instance, arguing that the Quran forbade wine and wheat beer, but not millet beer or fermented mare's milk.
Don't you love loopholes? But yeah, I think it's the culture shock that's definitely interesting, you know? I imagine with traveling, that's probably a cool part about it. Just seeing so many places where things and people are just different, you know? And, overall, yeah, I think that's probably just a cool thing, but I think it's all the differences in the world that just make it so, you know, unique. Just like, I don't know, I think it's a really cool aspect.
Ah, sweet, delicious loopholes. These differences came into stark relief when he met Ozbeg Khan, entering his huge gold-tiled tent and finding the ruler sitting on a silver throne, flanked by 4 unveiled wives. In fact, he was soon to learn that the Khan consulted his wives on matters of state, in public, and that upon entering a tent, it was the Khan that stood until his wives were seated. Mongol society often treated women as near
Oh, wow.
equals, and powerful women held a position higher than less powerful men. This was very different from his native
That's
Morocco,
different than most of the world.
where a leader's wives might privately wield influence, but were never seen in public. Ibn Battuta spent Ramadan with the Khan, visiting and conversing with his wives, and becoming particularly close with the youngest, Princess Bayalan, whom he shared much in common, for she too was far from home and adrift in a strange culture. The daughter of the Byzantine emperor, given away in a political marriage. Ibn Battuta sympathized, but for different reasons. While he liked the Khan, who was a generous and able ruler, he disliked how the man drank, even showing up for afternoon prayer one day, stumbling drunk and nearly incomprehensible.
Oh, dang. So he's like a drunkard. Alcoholism.
But as a point of etiquette, after all of the gifts and hospitality the Khan had bestowed upon him, he really couldn't just drop the mic and bail on his latest patron. So instead, he asked the Khan if he could take, you guessed it, a side trip. Because Princess Bayalan was pregnant and got permission to have their baby at home in Constantinople. So, Ibn Battuta requested to accompany her, as it was the perfect opportunity to take said side trip, not just in safety, but in style. The request granted, Ibn Battuta set out with the princess's caravan, doubling back to the city of the Byzantines, seeing the Hagia Sophia and meeting the emperor, marveling at the city's relative religious tolerance, and touring the Golden Horde.
That's really cool, though. Like, man, I do like that all the opportunities he's taken, and I do think I would like to see Istanbul, formerly Constantinople. I just imagine it would be such a rich and beautiful place, you know, historically.
But there was a bit of a problem. See, on the way back home, Princess Bayalan had started throwing off the facade of Islamic conversion, and now it was clear that she wasn't coming home. This had been an escape plan. So Ibn Battuta...
Oh, dude, that's wild. I've never heard that before, like a freaking political marriage just kind of, in a way, backstabbing. I mean, at least we haven't seen it on this channel, and so now that that's gone, again, like I said, like when we watch these videos, we don't really go in depth about political marriages. Like, you know, they're mentioned, like, oh, the Byzantine emperor gave his daughter away, and then that's kind of it. We don't really go into depth, obviously, because we have other things to cover, but I'd imagine that sometimes some of these weren't really happy, like, you know, and especially being far away from all that you know, with a different, you know, fate than you're probably used to, kind of being the dominant one. I imagine homesickness was probably a common cause in a lot of political marriages, especially from far away, so, yeah. And of course, he's going around telling, ooh, I'm telling the teacher, like, I don't know, he kind of gives me that kind of vibe. Oh, man.
had to turn around with the royal caravan, retrace his steps, and inform the Khan. Except now, it was winter on the steppe, and Ibn Battuta, a Moroccan, was not used to snow. It was so cold that they traveled along frozen rivers as if they were roads. So cold that when he washed his face with hot water, it froze in his beard.
Ooh.
So cold that he wore 3 fur coats and so many layers of clothing underneath that he had to be helped into the saddle. But they made it to the capital of the Khanate, and after presumably telling the Khan about his wife, because he never actually mentions the reaction, Ibn Battuta joined the trade caravans toward India. And this was some of the hardest traveling of his career, through mountains and dry country, and his recollections of it are confused and non-specific. In 8 months of relentless travel, he met the Khan of Chagatai, had a daughter, and finally crossed through the Khyber Pass into India. They had to spread blankets in front of the camels so their feet would not sink in the deep snow. The Indian border authorities met him as he crossed into India, questioning him about his intentions and qualifications, and telling him that should he wish to work for the Sultan, he must agree never to leave India except on official business. He agreed and signed a contract.
Oh boy, but for someone as wanderlusting as Ibn, that's quite the... You think he's gonna break it? I think he's gonna break it. I think he's gonna try to find loopholes to keep going around the world. Because he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would just settle for one place now. You know?
Then, he took out a loan to buy the Sultan an appropriate gift of horses, gold, and enslaved people, knowing the custom was to be granted an even larger gift in return. Yeah, he hadn't gone gold digging across 3 continents without learning how this stuff worked. When the party arrived, Ibn Battuta was overawed. The Sultan's wooden palace, known as the Hall of 1,000 Pillars, was one of the largest structures he'd ever seen. Could it be that the rumors of the Sultan's splendor and generosity were not an exaggeration? Well, unfortunately, it would be a while before Ibn Battuta found out, because Muhammad Tughlaq, the Sultan of Delhi, was out crushing a rebellion. But in his absence, the Sultan's vizier accepted the gift and gave Ibn Battuta silk robes, a house, the tax revenue of 2 villages, which is 5,000 silver dinars a year for those of you keeping score at home, plus another 2,000 dinars as a starting bonus. Ibn Battuta was floored. He was already part of Delhi's landed aristocracy, and he hadn't even been given a job yet. Then, things got even wilder, because the Sultan returned to Delhi in triumph, riding to the palace on a war elephant.
Heck yeah.
The first in a great procession of armored beasts. And on the back of each elephant was a huge basket of treasure and a catapult. Entranced, Ibn Battuta watched his men shoveled gold and silver coins into the machines and fired the treasure out into the celebrating crowd. And that's when it hit Ibn Battuta. This was a dream job. Coming here was a great idea. And this was only reinforced when he met the Sultan. And Muhammad Tughlaq liked the Moroccans so much that he made Ibn Battuta the Qadi of Delhi. And at this point, even Ibn Battuta was like, thank you? But maybe—
Dang, man, like, dude's really just showing up and getting all the opportunities. Like, man, fortune. Well, actually, I'm seeing too early because this is called the Mad Sultan, and I'm expecting something bad to happen because things are going too good. If I know anything about life, is that when things get too good, something bad's bound to happen. At least with my experience, that's usually how it goes. Things are going good, and then bad things just happen. So, I don't know. If nothing bad happens, I'm gonna be angry and bitter. But yeah.
maybe that's too much. I mean, except for being a Qadi on a caravan, I never had a real job or tried a case. In fact, your religious law here is a bit different than the type I studied. Not to mention your court language is Persian, which I don't really speak well, so maybe we just let me work my way up? Huh? The Sultan told him not to worry, assigned 2 deputies to do the real work, and doubled his salary.
Oh my gosh. Dude, I wish I could just get offered jobs like this. You kidding me? Holy crap. Dude, I wish. Here, have this job that you don't have to do and get more money. Oh, if only. If only. Oh, man. Yeah.
Unusual? Undoubtedly. But Ibn Battuta was about to find out that the Sultan of Delhi was a bit of an eccentric. An unorthodox visionary. Some referred to him as mad. Early in his reign, he'd experimented with issuing copper coins backed by gold, but that scheme fell apart when Chinese traders wouldn't accept them. Then, he decided to found a new capital and move his court to central India. And when the elites resisted, he used troops to force them. That too collapsed. And now, fearing the entrenched power blocks of the elites that hated him, the Sultan was hiring any foreigners that showed up so that they would be personally loyal to him.
Okay, so there is a bit of, pragmatism and scheming with this, because I'm like, man, he's generous, but that's a lot. He's just giving him so much power, and it makes sense. He wants to buy people who will do whatever he wants. That makes a lot of sense. There's like a pragmatism to it. Not just blind generosity. Though maybe he may have some of that too. At least with this case, for instance.
Which was good, at least for Ibn Battuta. He became close with the Sultan, observing as the monarch a religious scholar in his own right, invited Hindu and Jain holy men into the palace for religious debates. He even accompanied the monarch on military campaigns. At one point, the Sultan brought Ibn Battuta to see the Hindu yogis perform tricks, like climbing a levitated rope. A performance that terrified the devout young scholar. But being a favorite was a financial problem. Keeping up with the Sultan's lifestyle, the extravagant hunting trips, the constant gift-giving, and hosting officials at his house actually put Ibn Battuta into debt. So that was problem number 1. Problem number 2 was that the Sultan was a psychopath.
Oh.
Even Ibn Battuta, who often flattered his patrons, wrote, "The Sultan was far too free in shedding blood. He used to punish small faults and great without respect of persons, whether they men of learning or piety or noble descent. Every day there are brought to the audience hall hundreds of people, chained, pinioned, and fettered, and they are executed, tortured, or beaten. Muhammad Tughlaq killed advisors for disagreeing with them. He tortured holy men who refused to come to the palace. Particularly, he liked dropping red-hot squares of metal on victims' chests and ripping them off. And if he
Okay, okay, I was gonna say, like, yeah, things were going too good for him. Now I see that he's kind of in an awful situation. First of all, yeah, I'd imagine the extravagance of living basically as royalty amongst the nobility. Now it's coming into play as he's starting to, yeah, have financial issues. And not just that, but this guy, the Mad Sultan, as I'm gonna call him, yeah, it seems like you don't want to get on his bad side. I mean, I guess Ibn is fortunate to be on his good side, but it seems like if he were to ever find himself on the other side of that, he wouldn't be happy. It wouldn't end well. That's terrifying.
really hated someone, he'd throw them to his trained execution elements,
Ooh.
who would use the swords affixed to their tusks to play catch.
Holy crap. I love my war elephants. You guys know that. It's my favorite war animal. But man, they are terrifying.
With the unfortunate victim. And perhaps that's when it hit Ibn Battuta. Coming here was a terrible idea. He began plotting his escape. (1340) Delhi. For 6 years, Ibn Battuta has served as a Qadi for the Sultan of Delhi. But now he's under house arrest, awaiting execution. His friendship with a Sufi mystic had put him on the wrong side of the court. Ibn Battuta's friend had offended the Sultan by refusing a royal summons and calling the ruler a tyrant. In response, the Sultan tortured the mystic to death and arrested all of his associates. For 9 days, Ibn Battuta prays and recites the Quran from memory. Then, the Sultan beckons. Ibn Battuta goes expecting to die. But then the Sultan behaves like they're old friends, and everything's normal, as if he hasn't spent days preparing for death.
Like I said, that's so terrifying. I don't blame him. Get the heck out of there now. This dude's insane.
It's at this point that Ibn Battuta realizes one thing. He's got to escape Delhi.
Yeah.
Right as Ibn Battuta had arrived in Delhi, India entered a 7-year drought, which in turn caused a famine, which in turn triggered uprisings. Lots of uprisings. In fact, Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq would face 22 rebellions during his last 15 years in power. Hindus revolted against taxes, Indian Muslims rose against the foreign advisors, governors declared independence or hatched assassination plots, and Muhammad Tughlaq's paranoia went into overdrive. Ibn Battuta tried to tough it out, but after his brief imprisonment, he decided he had enough. And while the contract he'd signed meant he couldn't leave India, there was a loophole. He could go into religious retreat. So Ibn Battuta, court official and rich man, took the only escape hatch he could. He gave up all of his possessions, declared himself an ascetic, and lived in a cave. It was something he'd actually felt called to for years. Ever since he first began to encounter Islamic hermits, he'd wondered if that would be his path. Now, he learned to meditate, to live with nothing, fasting for 40 days at a time. But 5 months later, a summons came from the Sultan. He wanted Ibn Battuta back in court.
And there's no. You can't say no to this man. But, that's interesting, I think. You know, I'm a spiritual man myself, I like to say. You know, I practice religion heavily. And, you know, when I went to Nicaragua 10 years ago, I kind of did live sort of like a hermit. Like, you know, there was no access to technology there. I mean, there is technology there, but I didn't have access to my phone or computer or anything. And we were living on a mountain, you know, and a lot of my time was spent just in nature, reading my Bible. And, you know, I there are spiritual disciplines I practice, such as prayer, fasting, you know, etc. And I'll say, looking back, that was probably the best time of my life, I would say. So there is something just so like that trip was a visiting family and, you know, the place where my family came from, but, it kind of, in a sense, did become a spiritual retreat for me. And it did a lot for me. That's kind of where I got my name, Edwin de Jesus, because that's not my birth name. Um, but I was given that name by a holy man, and it means Edwin of Jesus. So, that's how EDJ. It's not my government name, but it is what I consider my real name, and that had lasting effects. I don't know. There is something just so much more beautiful about kind of being less worldly and more spiritual, you know? I find myself relating to this man a bit in certain areas, and it is getting me to talk more, which I really like. But yeah, he needs to get out of India, like, pronto now. Ugh.
And Ibn Battuta accepted. Partially because the Sultan killed anyone who refused, and partially because the offer came with a gift of gold, robes, horses, and enslaved people that restored all Ibn Battuta had given up, plus some. However, Ibn Battuta, rich again, went to court with a plan. He would get permission to make a pilgrimage to Mecca, and then just never come back. Huh? But the Sultan had his own idea. He needed an ambassador to visit the Yuan Emperor and deliver an enormous train of gifts. Would Ibn Battuta, famous traveler, want to go to China in style? He did not have to ask twice. But travel was dangerous in the unstable empire, and on the way to the coast, rebels ambushed the train. In the conflict, Ibn Battuta was separated from the diplomatic train, carrying all he owned, and was chased into the country. About to be captured, he was forced to lose his pursuers by ditching his horse and hiding while they followed his previous steed. A few days before, he'd been one of the richest men in Delhi. Now, he was alone in enemy country, with only his sword, boots, jewelry, clothes, and will to live. Then he promptly ran into rebels, who captured him, took said sword and jewels, and handed him over for execution. But Ibn Battuta still had his clothes, boots, and will to live. So, he negotiated.
Dude, that's so... Yeah, so far his misfortunes have mainly just come from the unstable situation in India. And considering that, people kind of hate the Sultan, him kind of being so closely tied with the Sultan would kind of make him, like, as an enemy, right, in the eyes of the rebels. Yeah.
Negotiated his release by giving his would-be executioners his fine tunic. Free again, he wandered the countryside, evading rebels and living by his wits for a week, with nothing now but his shirt, pants, boots, and still, a will to live. Then eventually, starving, he stumbled into a town to beg for food, and promptly got robbed for his shirt.
Ooh.
But he wouldn't quit. He still had his pants, and his boots, and, you know what? Wait, scratch that. At this point, he'd actually lost one boot trying to draw water out of a well. So, yeah. It was at this one booted point when he lost his will to live. But then, a miracle. Amidst this land of Hindu rebels, a Muslim man found him, fed him, and took him upon his back to bring him to safety.
Holy crap, he got piggy-packed. Piggy-packed. To safety, man. Again, fortune was very kind to this man so far. Granted, in India, like, things aren't going well, but even the most fortunate people have their downsides, right? Downtimes in life. Because I was being like, man, how's he gonna get out of this? He's like losing all his clothes. I was expecting him to be like completely butt naked by the end there, But yeah.
And all the while, Ibn Battuta recited the Quran until, exhausted, he passed out. When he awoke, he was in a friendly town and found out that the rest of his diplomatic mission was just 6 miles away, and very surprised to find him alive. And they still had all of his baggage and servants. He was rich again. Rejoining the group, they traveled to Calicut.
Man, this guy goes from broke to rich so easily. I'm so jealous. I'm just broke.
Port city where they could meet up with Chinese junks. These ships, enormous compared to the dhows Ibn Battuta traveled on, were Chinese-built, but crewed by Muslims in the India-China trade. He marveled at their 5 decks, and most of all, their large private cabins with their own lavatories. However, for this voyage, Chinese merchants and the other court diplomats had reserved all of those rooms, leaving Ibn Battuta with a smaller, toiletless cabin. That was no big deal, though. Ibn Battuta had learned humility after all. He'd lived in a cave, and just days before, he only had one shoe. He wouldn't quibble over a slightly smaller cabin. Wait, what's that? Oh, right, yeah. He threw a fit. How dare they dishonor the Sultan's ambassador by giving him worse accommodations than common merchants and lesser diplomats?
Yeah, like I said, don't Ibn can be quite kind of a Karen at times. So he really is just like, man, I want to talk to your manager, bro. By the way, I like the guy. I don't want to come across like I don't, because I'm just speaking. This is like the one trait I see, and I'm joking around. But it is kind of Karen-like. But it is also fair, too. Like, he is a, you know, a representative of, you know, of a powerful man. Like, you know, it is a kind of a matter of respect, though, in all fairness.
Diplomats? Ridiculous! After essentially wanting to speak to their manager, the ship's agent...
I see, like, you can't call me out on this one. Like, he kind of agreed with me with that joke of being a Karen.
Syrian managed to smooth things over by securing a comparable stateroom on the fleet's second, slightly smaller ship. This mollified the prickly ambassador, and Ibn Battuta loaded all of his possessions and entourage into the second ship. The night before the voyage, he stayed on shore to pray, and suddenly a storm blew up. One bad enough that the two vessels had to put to sea, leaving him ashore, again with nothing but the clothes on his back. As he watched from the shore, the vessel he was supposed to be on wrecked.
What can I get you today?
Killing everyone aboard. And
Oh my gosh.
the second ship, carrying all that he owned, blew so far out to sea that they decided to continue to China without him. He was stranded and poor again. And
Dude, just take a drink every time he becomes rich and poor, man. I'm afraid I might, like, die of alcohol poisoning. I don't drink alcohol, by the way. Never tried it, but still, you know, for those of you who do, by all means. Actually, now I think about it, you might die. Don't. I don't want to be responsible for your deaths for this game. So, but what I'm getting at is, man, this dude, man, this is a life. You know, the most perilous moment I had when I went to Greece is that I believe it was in the island of Samos. Up till then, like from France to Athens to Naxos, etc., Peros, you know, we kind of, me and my mother, who accompanied me on this voyage, kind of just used Uber, you know, Lyft, Uber, etc. But at Samos, my mom decided to get the idea to drive, and so rented a car and we drove. And as we were trying to get to a certain beach, which we had heard, which was really good, I don't know what was it with like Google Maps, but it brought us to a mountain, and then like off the main road into like areas like the forest. Like we literally threw a car, crossed a river. Insane. It wasn't like a huge one, but you know what I mean. Like we were off the official road, and we just darted into like parts of the mountain where it's just like tall grass, and we couldn't see where we were going, and the car was going up and down, and we freaked out because we were like, where are we going? And like we're not on the main road anymore. We're crossing rivers and like areas like dirt. Just, it was all over the place, and we just backtracked. We were like, we're going back, and eventually Google Maps got its act together and actually brought us to where we needed to go on a road, on an official road, not where we were going. But we were kind of lost, and it was frightening. You know, that was the most perilous part of my journey. But nothing compared to this. But like, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to share some of my travel horror story. Something bad that happened in my travel, you know? So yeah, feel free to share some of your travel misfortunes. I'd like to hear.
And now, he'd lost all of the Sultan's splendid gifts for the Emperor. So he really didn't want to go back to Delhi and explain his failure to the Sultan's execution elephants. At first, he tried to get a job with another Indian Sultan, even fighting in an amphibious assault to prove himself worthy of employment. But that didn't work out, and Ibn Battuta instead snuck off with a nebulous plan to just go to China. Fulfill as much of his old mission as possible. In doing so, he of course would take the most out-of-the-way route possible through the Maldives Islands. But the local Muslim authorities there needed a chief judge, and they were plying him with gifts, so, old habits die hard. He agreed to stay and take the job.
Heck yeah,
under a few
side
conditions.
quest.
First, he got a ton of treasure, making him rich again. Second, he married into the royal family. And third, he didn't want to walk anywhere. Yeah, he had to be carried on a litter like the king. They agreed, and he spent 9 months meting out punishments under religious law, doling out floggings for failing to attend mosque.
Heck yeah, dude. Now he's royalty, basically. And now he's rich. I'm telling you, man. I wish. This man's... he is fortunate.
Sentencing thieves to have their hands cut off, and, unsuccessfully, trying to convince the island's women to stop going around topless. He married 3 more times, finding that the island's cowrie shell dowries were cheap and divorce simple. Indeed, it was common at this time for merchants to get temporarily married during these short stays. But his high living gained him enemies, and he fled the Maldives with his new fortune, only to tarry on a neighboring island just long enough to get married and divorced twice more. Then at last, he took his replenished treasury and toured Sri Lanka before hiring yet another ship to take him to China. A ship which was attacked by pirates, who once again took everything he
Oh
owned.
my gosh. I was just joking, but seriously, if you make a drinking game out of this, you would die.
Don't think the universe liked Ibn Battuta being rich. But finally, his luck changed. He then got passage to the court of the Muslim Sultan who ruled the northern tip of Sumatra. And that little side trip you can hear about over in our Majapahit series, because this guy gets around. When he departed, he at last left behind the Islamic world, the last kingdom he would visit, ruled by a Muslim. He stopped in the kingdom of Champa, current-day Vietnam, and visited a third great kingdom, that of the warrior queen, Urdura, that may have been in either the Philippines or Java. Urdura, tall, adorned with gold and jewels, her hair flowing long, gave Ibn Battuta gifts and showed him the powerful fleet she used to battle Chinese forces. Her greatest ambition, she told him, was to lead an expedition to India, so she pumped him for information about his time there. Waving goodbye, she put him on a ship to China. And at long last, he arrived at his objective, the land of the Mongol Yuan emperors, where even beggars wore silk. A place so alien, he could barely understand it. And haunting his steps came a new horror, the Black Plague.
Oh no, not the Black Plague.
1346, Xuanzhou, China. Ibn Battuta found China a land of wonders, an upside-down place where people used paper instead of coin, and even beggars wore silk. China was beautiful, he wrote, but it did not please me, because while Ibn Battuta had traveled widely, most of the communities he visited were Muslim or Muslim-ruled, and he rarely ventured outside that bubble. Where minority religions existed, they were at least other monotheists, like Christians or Jews. The Chinese, by contrast, were polytheistic and worshipped what Ibn Battuta considered idols. Confucian scholars were dismissive of Islam, and the population ate pork and cremated their dead. This disturbed me so much, he wrote, that I stayed indoors most of the time. And
Freaking culture shock, man.
only went out when necessary. During my stay in China, whenever I saw Muslims, I always felt as though I were meeting my own family and close kinsmen. Perhaps it was time to go home. But when he did so, death followed him. Ibn Battuta didn't have to look far to find other Muslims in Yuan, China. Indeed, for over a century, the Mongol Yuan had kept an open-door policy that invited foreigners to settle and form trading villages. While in these Islamic enclaves, he even ran into other scholars he'd met during his travels. Because as you've probably understood by now, Ibn Battuta was not an explorer. During his travels, he'd made his way along well-known pilgrimage and trade routes. The Mongol conquest and the peace and security that they'd created had fostered an unprecedented network of overland and maritime trade routes. Few people traveled to the extent that Ibn Battuta did, but he was far from the only person to journey from Africa to East Asia. In China, he met Syrians, Egyptians, and even a man who grew up 40 miles from him back in Morocco. Because you see, the world of the mid 14th century was an interconnected world, one where goods and people could go from one side of Africa and Eurasia to the other. And that would ultimately destroy this period of peace and interchange. Because in Central Asia, a terrible disease was emerging. A disease that caused painful buboes on the body, extreme
Ugh.
headaches, and delirium. An even more aggressive form, the airborne pneumatic variety, caused victims to cough blood and killed within hours. It was a disease born by fleas. Fleas that lived on rats, an animal that liked to infest ships or stow away.
Yeah, I remember when we were learning about the Black Plague, like back in like 5th grade, a long time ago for me. Yeah, like a huge part of it was like the rats and the travel and getting on ships, etc. Which helped spread the plague further, and just how devastating it was. Yeah.
On caravans and wagons. In other words, an insect that infested all modes of transport Ibn Battuta had taken on his long road. When he boarded his ship back to India, he had no idea that he was seeing the last days of Yuan China. Bubonic plague would lead to the dynasty's collapse, and sow chaos on the peaceful trade roads of the 4 Mongol kingdoms. Indeed, Ibn Battuta would begin to see that collapse himself. He retraced his route to India and considered going back to Delhi. But word reached him that the Sultanate was tearing itself apart, and Ibn Battuta was worried that the Sultan would execute him for his failed mission. So, he made another plan. A little, what is that thing called?
Oh, of course.
Oh yeah, a side trip to Mecca to make the Hajj one last time. But by the time he made it to the Arabian Peninsula, the pilgrimage season had ended. He would need to wait a year before it started again. So, rather than just hang out, he took another separate side trip. A side trip. Revisiting Persia, Iraq, Syria, and Egypt to see how things had changed in the time he'd been away. And he was shocked at what he found. The great Ilkhan, the man he'd traveled with, was dead, likely from plague. He'd left an empty throne, several ongoing wars, and his Mongol and Turkish generals were ripping the land apart in a series of succession conflicts. It was the first dark cloud in what would be a storm of sadness. He arrived in Damascus to find that the son he'd left behind, with one of his many ex-wives, had died in childhood. And a separate message told him that his father had passed away 15 years before. Saddened, he took a trip
Sucks. Oh man, that sucks, dude. That's awful.
to Aleppo. But as he traveled, a great curtain was being pulled across Syria. The Black Plague descended on the Middle East, chasing him on the road. He fled back to Damascus, but found the oasis city ground to a halt, with 2,000 dying every day and the populace in terror. As in Europe, the Islamic world believed the disease came from a religious rather than medical source. But while Christian Europe interpreted it as punishment for human sin, and greeted the plague with apocalyptic sermons, self-flagellation, and massacres of their Jewish neighbors, Islamic cities looked on it as a manifestation of the divine will. To them, it was an aspect of God's unknowable plan that must simply be endured with humility. Ibn Battuta saw the residents of Damascus fast for 3 days, followed by a packed day of prayer and supplication in the mosque. Afterward, the multi-ethnic populace paraded through the city streets together, holding aloft copies of their holy texts. Muslims carried the Quran, Christians the Bible, and Jews the Torah, all with tears, imploring their God to stop the suffering. Damascus would lose more than 30,000 citizens to the disease, its streets choked with funeral parades, corpses left uncovered due to the city running out of burial shrouds. Ibn Battuta fled to Cairo, passing empty villages and bodies along the road. And when he arrived, he found the great city, with a population of 500,000, deserted by its leaders and losing 24,000 residents each day. Plague would eventually kill 200,000, including most of the army officers, sending the Mamluk Sultanate into decline. But in 1348, the worst year of the plague, Ibn Battuta made it to Mecca and fulfilled his goal of making the Hajj one last time. It must have made him think of his first pilgrimage, when he left Tangier at the age of 21, freshly graduated and never having left home. Now, he was a 45-year-old man. "I was moved by memories of my homeland," he wrote. "Affection for my family and dear friends, who drew me toward my land, which in my opinion was better than any other country." Yet when he arrived home in Tangier, he found his mother had died of plague as well. And days later, he was on the road again. At a loss for what to do, he volunteered as a soldier to defend the Rock of Gibraltar from a Spanish siege, but arrived to find the battle already over. Instead, he toured Muslim Spain before returning home. But that was not the end of his journey. The Sultan of Morocco, hearing of his voyages, appointed him ambassador to the Golden Empire of Mali. Though that's a tale you'll have to hear about over in our Empire of Mali series, because this dude went everywhere. And when he returned, the Sultan gave Ibn Battuta a new command, to dictate his story to the poet Ibn Juzay, so that there could be a record of all he saw in the Muslim world. The result was not a perfect book. Ibn Battuta worked from memory, and as a result, got details wrong, misremembered dates, and mixed up some events. Someone, either Ibn Battuta himself or Ibn Juzay, decided to fill in the blanks by copying sections of other travel books, even inventing some journeys so the book would be a full compendium of the whole Muslim world. For instance, Ibn Battuta likely never made it out of southern China, nor did he travel far north into Russia as the book claims. And Rob talks about how we know that in our Lives episode, which is linked in the description below. But despite all these issues, The Travels is an extraordinary document. One that, despite its contradictions, exaggerations, and occasionally confused timelines, gives historians an unprecedented look at the Muslim world of the 14th century and how its trade networks operated. Given that, it's almost anticlimactic to say that when they were originally published, they received little attention. In fact, Ibn Battuta's fellow judges often called him an uneducated liar. We know almost nothing about the rest of his life, only that he likely settled down as a mid-level Qadi, probably married again if precedent had anything to say about it, and died without fanfare. It's ironic then that today, Ibn Battuta's personal fame eclipses any of the rulers and even some of the kingdoms he visited, while few people around the world
That makes sense. He just has such a rich... he had such a rich life. Like, you can't help but, like, admire his, like, own personal, like, journey. Like, there's just so much that happened and that he saw in the world. So, like, yeah, just, like, oh, that was really cool. Like I said, I didn't know this guy before this video, but again, I think I might just read The Travels, because, like I said, I do love reading. I was an English major. I've graduated with my bachelor's in English already, you know. May was the end of my journey with that, and yeah, just overall, like, I'm really, I think I'll definitely read his book, because I think that's gonna be very interesting.
Of the Ilkhanate, or Mohammed Tughlaq, Ibn Battuta's life has been the subject of television dramas, movies, and even video games. You can visit Ibn Battuta Mall in Dubai, where the different sections are themed to his journeys. Fly into Tangier, and you'll land in Ibn Battuta Airport, eat at Ibn Battuta restaurants, visit an Ibn Battuta festival, and even see an unmarked tomb that's said to be his final
Holy
resting.
crap, the dude became, like, this became so marketable. He's literally a franchise. That's amazing. Yeah, I want to go to the Ibn Battuta festival. See giant blimps of the dude? You kidding me? That'd be amazing. I don't know what we would do, but, like, you know, definitely not get drunk, but, you know, heck yeah.
Place. He even has a crater on the moon. I have indeed, praise be to God, attained my desire in this world, he wrote, which was to travel through the earth, and I have attained in this respect what no other person has attained to my knowledge. Though not for a lack of trying, as his life has been an inspiration for countless travelers over the years, myself included. Granted, you know, my journey was a little less of an arduous one in a...
I think the video's done. It's already long enough, this video. And uploading longer videos is a bit hard for me, but I need to get to work. I think for the most part he's done, so I'm just gonna end the video right here. But this was cool. Tomorrow we begin with the rise of the Ottoman Empire. So, I'll see you guys then. Bye everyone.